But at the same time, as an industry, we are trying to go through this once in a generation transition, which is pretty seismic for the industry. And if you look at kind of how the transition to the EVs have already started to change market dynamics and the key players and the interactions between different parts of the industry and different parts of the world, we definitely can see that there's going to be a lot of turbulence as we kind of go through and navigate this transition.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for listening. I'm your host, Kerry Jordan. Welcome to our show where we hear from manufacturing and supply chain leaders who are driving the future of this industry. Today, I'm speaking with Luke Hampton, the head of supply chain at the Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders, which is abbreviated as SMMT. This is one of the largest and most influential trade associations in the United Kingdom. It's well recognized for the resources it provides, such as a wealth of automotive data, like for new vehicle registrations for cars and commercial vehicles, and UK automotive manufacturing data for cars, engines, and light commercial vehicles, or LCVs. SMMT is the voice of the UK motor industry, and it represents more than 800 automotive companies in the UK. It provides a forum to voice their views, to help guide strategies, and to build positive relationships with government and regulatory authorities. Now, Luke Hampton, as head of supply chain at SMMT, has been instrumental in supporting the UK's automotive manufacturing sector for over a decade. This will certainly be an interesting conversation because he has led key initiatives such as the research related to Brexit negotiations, SMMT's Meet the Buyer programs, and the launch of the post-COVID Safe Harbor program. His background is in technological innovation, electric vehicles, and strategic event planning. Luke, welcome, and thank you for joining the show.
Thanks, Kerry. That's quite an intro.
We're looking forward to learning from you. So you've been leading this industry, and helping to navigate some very difficult challenges. So I'm really interested in asking, over the past decade or so, what have been the most significant changes that you've observed in the automotive supply chain?
Firstly, thanks for the opportunity to speak today. We, within the SMMT, are always very keen to share our views and thoughts with organizations across the rest of the world. I think in terms from the supply chain perspective, the key one that we were grappling with for a long time was Brexit. That was such a seismic change, not only for the UK as a country, but also for us as an industry. And across supply chain, we really felt that it was going to be the biggest thing that we were going to have to deal with in a generation, a once in a generation change and shift. And then quickly followed COVID, which was a bigger animal to deal with, probably it's fair to say,
Right.
from a day-to-day perspective, but also from a supply chain logistics, from a manufacturing environment perspective, and also, of course, in terms of the products. And with that came the challenges that lasted much longer than the global pandemic itself, be it in terms of chip shortages, as well as the kind of the change that we're currently grappling with, which is around the transition to EV primarily. So it's been a bumpy few years, I think it's probably fair to say, no more so perhaps than for the UK as a state and as an industry and as a location to be supplying into or from, given the additional complexities that Brexit has provided on top of the kind of the ramifications from the global pandemic that everybody felt.
That brings me to my next question, because you mentioned there are these, variety of different changes that have influenced, and now we're at this point where EVs, the electric vehicles, are really, gaining a lot of interest, attention, investment, and you throughout your career, you've advocated for and helped to steer technological innovation. So I wanted to ask you about digital transformation or digital technologies, and perhaps, how has that influenced the broader automotive industry throughout these changes, and particularly from a trade association standpoint like SMMT, you work so heavily with data. How do you see digital technologies influencing the automotive industry?
Yeah, I think it's probably one of the biggest, if not the biggest, technological theme that we're dealing with, alongside that electrification piece that I mentioned, because the digitalization piece affects every single part of the industry. If we look through the kind of the life cycle of the vehicle, we're seeing examples of it from the product itself. So be that in terms of an increasingly complex digital product. The vehicles themselves have, and back in the day, there were just tens of ECUs. Now there are hundreds, and we're going up the gigabytes into the terabytes of data that are being generated from the vehicles themselves. And they are not only becoming more complex, but more connected not only with themselves, but also with other vehicles on the road and with the infrastructure and across networks as well. So we've got this increasingly digitally complex product ecosystem itself, and an increasingly complex network that it connects into. There's also the digitalization of the design and development process as well. So in terms of the digital tools that are used, there's some really good examples of some of our members who are using in-loop testing with digital twins, where they're able to ramp down the cost associated with product development. Cycle times, time to markets are coming down, costs are coming down, which have a massive impact, particularly at the moment when we're going through a period of such challenging transition. Getting product to market as quickly as possible is incredibly important. And if you're able to do it at a lower cost, that's absolutely fantastic for the end customer or for shareholder value as well. So that whole design and development piece is one other area where we're seeing massive developments from a digitalization piece. And then when you get on to kind of manufacturing and supply chains as well, we're seeing increasing levels of connectivity between different tiers, the importance of things like AI tools to help manage risk, supply chain risk throughout the supply chain is fantastic. Really good to see, where that technology in particular can go to support manufacturing supply chains. So it really is kind of touching on every single different part of the industry. So it's a very exciting time, but it's also a period where there's a need for companies to try and understand what works and what doesn't work so well. And that's where a trade association is quite useful, because we can pull different parts of the industry together. We can pull thought leaders together. We can share best practice, provide those sorts of forums, as well as provide routes into the regulators, to governments and states, to make sure that the views of the industry when it comes to the development or the application of these technologies is well heard and understood within those key stakeholders as well.
I'm interested in learning a bit more about those companies that you're working with and those specific challenges that they're facing, because that is pretty interesting when they're coming to you. They're looking for the guidance. What are some of those specific challenges that kind of causes them to think, oh, I need help here? And you've mentioned the electrification, of course, needing to reduce costs, maybe navigating the complexity of the networks. Is there any one thing that's kind of starting to emerge, or is it a mixture of many? Like, what are those challenges that are really causing, that need to reach out?
Yeah, I think you've touched on the big ones, to be honest, because the context that we're in at the moment is that we've come off the back of this incredibly turbulent time with COVID and those other elements that I touched on. But at the same time, as an industry, we are trying to go through this once in a generation transition, which is pretty seismic for the industry. And if you look at kind of how the transition to the EVs have already started to change market dynamics and the key players and the interactions between different parts of the industry and different parts of the world, we definitely can see that there's going to be a lot of turbulence as we kind of go through and navigate this transition. So a lot of the time, companies are coming to us because they want to understand what that future is going to look like and what can their role be in that future, and what do they need to do to maximize the benefits? In the UK at the moment, we're challenged from an EV perspective, and we have something called the zero emission vehicle mandate at the moment, which basically says that a certain proportion of fleet sales need to be battery electric by a certain date. And at the end of this year, it's 22%, and that will ramp up as we move towards 100% in the coming years. And we're not there yet, but that market direction is one of the things that we can help our members try and navigate. Similarly, across Europe, there's a kind of slightly different approach that's being taken, and that space is also changing from a political standpoint. So we try and provide as much of that kind of market intelligence and foresight as possible, whilst also providing our members with a route forward in terms of a channel that they can touch into to help steer the conversation in the way that they want. So market stability and intelligence is certainly one area. The other point that you mentioned is certainly around the kind of the cost side, because as you alluded to, with everything that's been happening over the last few years, costs have been spiraling to an extent in some areas. In other areas, they've come down, but there are a lot of companies that are challenged in that space. They're challenged from a business continuity, from a solvency perspective as well. So we try and work with them as much as possible to help them identify where those opportunities may be. You mentioned the Meet the Buyer program. We've got one of those coming up next week in Coventry, where we'll be matching up buyers and suppliers as much as possible to try and connect those dots from a commercial standpoint to see what opportunities there may be for the UK suppliers moving forward. When it comes to the kind of the cost-based piece, we also work very closely with government to try and help them identify ways in which the UK government can support the industry in terms of managing costs and investing in itself. So we're quite excited here in the UK. We've got a new government. We've got a new Labour government here in power, but it's still probably a little bit early to be able to say exactly what they're going to be doing in terms of supportive interventions on behalf of the UK automotive sector. We do anticipate we're going to find out a little bit more about that in the coming weeks as we start seeing what their vision of an industrial strategy will be, and have no doubt that from a UK automotive perspective, SMMT will be making sure that we have a fair share of voice within that, and supply chain will be central to that as well.
So there's been a lot of change and even more on the horizon, is what it sounds like.
Absolutely, a real state of flux.
So what sort of technologies are helping? I mean, and anything new, and any new technologies, emerging technologies. You mentioned digital twin. I mean, that is certainly something that has been out there, but I feel like as I'm speaking with more and more business leaders, that technology is growing in popularity.
Mm-hmm.
What other emerging technologies do you see business leaders, automotive leaders looking to in order to help them adapt to some of these changes?
So I think within the manufacturing space, we're really excited to see what's happening from an automation perspective. Automation's been around for a long time within automotive, but from a productivity gains perspective, automation is absolutely critical. And if there are any ways that competitiveness gains can be made from increasing automation, increasing productivity, particularly in light of things like sustainability goals, for example, we do anticipate that we're going to see a lot more of that within the UK auto sector. In addition to that, we also touched on earlier the kind of the role of AI. Now, AI is a fantastically exciting technology theme globally. I'm not sure whether we're necessarily going to see a generative AI developed car, very soon. We may do, who knows? And I don't think we're going to be replacing people with, AI to kind of make cars necessarily yet. But there are some really interesting touch points, I think, where an artificial intelligence can tap into big data sets, for example, particularly around things like supply chain risk, following paper trails, following orders, to understand, through a supply chain where there may be risk factors that perhaps aren't necessarily available or visible to the human eye, and what that can do to make sure that from a supply chain management perspective, you're seeing less disruption, you're seeing less cost added to your base, and you're better able to deliver essentially for your customers in the end game. I think that's going to be a really interesting area, and that's outside of the kind of the technologies that we have within auto, which I'm just really excited about. Be that in terms of the battery electrics, what that next generation of battery chemistry is going to be, whether it's on the an anode development or a whole new battery chemistry, solid state batteries, etc. Those could be real game changers that could blow away a lot of the kind of the concerns that a lot of people have around electrification, or indeed around hydrogen. A lot of our members are looking very closely at that. We've seen some really interesting products come out in terms of fuel cell electric vehicles that are potentially game changers. If the right ecosystem from a hydrogen economy perspective can develop and support those products in use and on the road.
There are a lot of really interesting new technologies that are in play, which is great because we have some tough challenges that we need to solve as a world. You mentioned the net zero emission vehicles and net zero goals. So I did want to get your opinion on how do organizations leverage technologies like automation, like AI, to build in that supply chain efficiency, but then also the investment that's required around sustainability. How do organizations balance this need for efficiency as well as the investment to achieve sustainability goals? And then sort of what role do you see trade associations like SMMT playing in that, helping them achieve that balance?
Yeah, I mean, sustainability needs to be front and center of what we're doing, partly because, from an environmental perspective, we want to be protecting the planet, we want to be doing our bit, and we've seen fantastic levels of commitment from the industry towards net zero and towards a net zero future. The kind of the implicit connection with that is that you're able to save on various elements. So costs, for example, if you're able to become more energy efficient, you don't have to spend so much on energy as well. So there is a cost saving element associated with that, which is fantastic. From a UK automotive perspective, we at the SMMT, we published the sustainability report for the UK auto sector, and published the 25th edition of it recently, which first started back in 1999. And just relative to that, some of the stats from that, we've seen a decrease in scope 1 and 2 CO2 emissions, down 55% since 1999. Waste to landfill down 99%, and CO2 per vehicle down by 54%. So from a UK automotive industry perspective, we've taken sustainability absolutely seriously and have made significant strides over the last 25 years to really address some of those goals. And intrinsic within that is efficiency gains, increased levels of automation that we've seen, and supply chains within that. So, movements to just in time, reducing lead times on certain products and the movement distances, etc. It's absolutely critical that the industry continues and builds on the successes that it's had so far. And I've, every faith, that the industry will be able to meet its goals, meet its environmental targets in particular. In terms of the role that SMMT has, we do a good job in terms of measuring and monitoring some elements. So, the sustainability report is a good example. But we also provide that network and that community that industry can come together around to discuss and debate certain topics such as sustainability. So there are good forums within trade bodies that will allow you to understand best practice, understand what your competitors are doing, understand what other companies that are very similar to yours are doing to address things like sustainability performance increases. What are they doing? What's practical? What works? And what has a kind of a measurable difference that you could take forward? So I think the key message would be, trade associations are a really good environment to be a part of if you want to be learning about something that you're not sure about, or you want to get a bit of a steer on what you could be doing more of.
So that brings me to collaboration, because it sounds like in that kind of environment, there would be a lot of opportunities for collaborating across lines, perhaps not only within the automotive industry, but maybe beyond, especially when thinking about regulatory bodies, the government. What best practices do trade associations like SMMT bring to maybe advocate for in order to enhance these partnerships within the industry, but then, of course, beyond?
Collaboration is absolutely central. We can't function as an organization without collaboration, and we need our membership in the industry that we represent to be open to that. And we're very fortunate in the UK that we have a good level of engagement from the auto sector, and they see the value in it. The benefit is really significant, like I said, in terms of being able to provide the kind of the forum in which ideas can be shared. And we have to be careful how we do that from a competition perspective, competition law perspective, I mean. But we're able to share experiences and debate and discuss what is potentially needed for the industry. Within the UK, we also have something called the Automotive Council, which was heralded in its time as best practice. It was founded originally back in 2009, and then went through a kind of a change through when we had a coalition government that came in shortly after. And it essentially provided a framework within which UK government and UK industry could come together and debate and discuss and agree, most importantly, what the strategic direction for the industry was going to be, and what the role of government was going to be in terms of supporting industry along that route, be it in terms of certain interventions, grants, programs, R&D, skills-based activities, or something more interventionist. So there are really good examples where if you have the right level of appetite, should we say, from industry, and the right level of appetite from other stakeholders, where you can have a really solid long-term plan and a long-term vision for the future, that goes beyond individual government parties and individual companies to something that's more holistic, that you can get some really good traction and pave the way for a bright future. Within the UK as well, we also are very keen on that point that you referenced in terms of collaboration outside of the automotive sector, and work very closely with a number of our other sister associations. And we've done various activities to kind of cross-pollinate between manufacturing sections. You mentioned the Meet the Buyer activity earlier. We used to do one of those with the rail sector and with marine and with aerospace as well. And we've worked closely with some other sectors in that space to try and connect the dots as much as possible across manufacturing.
That's interesting. What are some of the maybe key takeaways or lessons learned by working across those other sectors, from the automotive space to rail?
So each sector is very different. It's very different. The flavor, I think, is probably the best way to describe it. Is very different for each one. Product life cycles are different. The kind of the structure of the industries are quite different. Aerospace, for example, it's a much flatter pyramid, whereas automotive is quite sort of long and deep. Rail, for example, has these really long product life cycles. Same with aerospace to an extent. And so each of those have different impacts, I guess, on the dynamics between buyers and suppliers. I won't say which one's better, but it was an interesting exercise for sure.
That's great. Well, can I ask you about electric vehicles? I mean, certainly there's growing demand. I mean, here in the US, I see them more often. I know that they are growing in the UK. How do you advise the automotive industry to adapt to this growing demand?
We definitely take the advice of our members in this space, and we work with them to try and make sure that message of what we see and what we want is well heard and understood. So yes, we've seen some really good growth in electric vehicle demand here in the UK recently, for sure. And at the moment, the battery electric market share sits at around 17%, which is really, really positive. We've come a long way in the last kind of 10 years, I guess, from when it was, 0.1% of market share right the way up to where it is now. But we need to go further. And I mentioned the zero emission vehicle mandate and the kind of the 22% for this year and 28% for next year, and the continuation up that route. That's going to be a challenging environment. And so we are working very closely with our members to ensure that we're able to push a message that they think is reflective of what the industry needs. And at the moment, that is around a cut to the VAT, the kind of the sales tax that we have in the UK, to help stimulate the market, because we want to see more battery electric vehicles on the roads, and we'll continue to push that with the new government as much as possible. In terms of where that goes next, the advice that we have for certainly component manufacturers and members of the supply chain is to make sure that you have a part of that, because we understand that is the future direction. And whilst there are some companies that may have kind of legacy internal combustion engine program technology, we always say, you need to be thinking about the future, because we can see that that's the general trend, that's the direction, and it's a really exciting one to be a part of. However, at the same time, the internal combustion engine does have a future still, and we imagine it's not going to be switched off overnight. There's a kind of a role for it to play in the future, and with the European move to things like e-fuels and potentially things like hydrogen internal combustion engines or hydrogen-based internal combustion engines, there may be a kind of a route in that space too. So there's a lot of hedging of bets at the moment, I would say, and that's what we'd certainly recommend our members to be doing, to be considering at least, all eventualities.
That's sage advice. I mean, this space is ripe for innovation, but also a lot of risk. So
Yes,
that
absolutely.
makes sense. Well, I have to ask you, as head of supply chain at SMMT, what kind of car do you drive?
I probably shouldn't say this. I actually drive a Volkswagen Transporter. So it's
Oh,
a
dude.
2-liter diesel van, which I use for various weekend trips, adventures, surfing trips down to Cornwall, biking trips up in the Alps. It's more of I'd like to think of it as an adventure van, but it probably just looks like a normal handyman van.
Either way, that's very practical of you.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
What advice do you give to friends and family who are looking to invest in a new car?
I always recommend having a think about electric for sure, because I mean they are fantastic products. They really are. I think it's important to factor in your use cycle. What is it that you want to do with that vehicle? Because we are very lucky at the moment. There is a range and a multitude of different options. So, if you are traveling 100 miles a day, 200 miles a day for work, a battery electric may not be the best option for you. But it also might be, it might be the right profile of vehicle for you. So I would definitely consider all options, but certainly think about electrification for sure in the first instance.
Yeah, I've been watching the market. I don't have an electric vehicle yet, but I'm really interested in them.
Mm,
I saw that there is a lot of innovation, especially Volkswagen around the old bus, that they're electrifying the bus. I think that would be so fun.
yeah,
So I'm
absolutely. Yeah,
definitely watching.
I have
Yeah, I
to say
can't wait,
that's the kind of, for me that would be absolutely wonderful.
right?
One of those, yeah, because that's the equivalent of the van that I have at the moment. So an
Mhm.
electric one of those would be great. Other brands are available, just to be clear.
Yeah. Well, this is great. One last question for you, and that is, what haven't you shared about maybe your daily challenges, conversations? What excites you about working in this space? Maybe what's coming next. But what final thoughts do you have for us?
The key message really is that the future is not certain. I think that's what, going back right to the beginning, what what I was trying to say in terms of that idea that Brexit was this big, scary thing that we were going to be dealing with, and all of a sudden, COVID came and hit, which was 10 times as big. So we don't know what the future holds, and we don't know where the industry is going to go, be it in terms of the kind of the electrification journey, those other technology elements that I mentioned, which is, fundamentally a really exciting space to be, because that kind of uncertainty, whilst it makes it very difficult to plan, can mean that, there's a lot of opportunity there. And I would just say for anybody listening in, trade associations as an organization type are really fantastic to work with in that space, because they provide you with that touch point, that regular opportunity to engage with the rest of the industry, to hear what the latest is, to understand where, what that future may look like. So if you're not already, please do engage with your local trade association.
Well, this was such a great conversation. Thank you so much. It's been wonderful to learn from your experience. As we go ahead and wrap up, for anyone who wants to learn more about you or the Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders, where would you direct them to find that information?
The SMMT's website is a wonderful fount of knowledge for anybody interested in the UK auto sector. So that's www.smmt.co.uk.
Great. We will include the links in the show notes. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Kerry.
That was Luke Hampton, Head of Supply Chain at the Society of Motor Manufacturers and Traders. And to everyone listening, thank you for being a part of the future of manufacturing.